My mom announced she sold the house and gave me 30 days to leave. My dad stayed silent. My sister smirked, and I realized they'd planned it all along. So I said, "You actually sold the house to me. I'm 27 and I work in tech. On paper, that sounds impressive. In real life, it mostly meant long hours, quiet paychecks that grew faster than anyone realized, and a habit of keeping my wins to myself. I learned early that in my family, visibility was dangerous. If they noticed you, it was usually because they needed something. From the outside, we looked like a normal American family. A decent house in a quiet neighborhood. Dinners together most nights. Smiling holiday photos that still sit somewhere in my mother's social media archives. But inside that house, there was an unspoken hierarchy. Everyone understood instinctively. At the top was my mother. She didn't yell much. She didn't need to. Control came naturally to her, wrapped in calm sentences, polite smiles, and decisions that were already final by the time she announced them. Affection in our house was conditional. Approval had to be earned, and it could be taken back at any moment. My father existed in the background of her authority. He wasn't cruel. That almost made it worse. When tension filled the room, he retreated into silence, into his plate, into whatever excuse let him avoid choosing sides. He believed peace meant compliance. Over time, that taught me something painful. His comfort mattered more than my protection. Then there were my sisters. My younger sister was still in high school for most of this. Loud, emotional, dramatic, and indulged in a way I never was. Her moods shaped the house. If she was upset, everything stopped. If she wanted something, it became a family priority. My older sister was different. She carried herself like life owed her something. She spoke with confidence even when she was wrong. My mother admired that in her, where I was quiet and careful. She was bold and demanding. Guess which one was praised for knowing her worth? And then there was me, the extra chair at the table, the one who blended in, the one who never caused trouble, never asked for much, never needed attention. At least that's how they described me. What they really meant was that I was easy to ignore. I learned not to ask questions, not to interrupt, not to expect fairness. Birthdays were small for me, sometimes acknowledged late in the evening like an afterthought. Vacations were too expensive if I wanted to come, but somehow affordable when it was just them. I stayed behind, often watched the house cleaned up, made myself useful without being noticed. By the time I was 16, I got a job after school. Not because I wanted spending money, but because asking my parents for anything felt humiliating. With my first few paychecks, I bought myself a used laptop. It was slow, loud, and overheated constantly, but it was mine. That laptop changed everything. At night, after the house went quiet, I taught myself to code. I sat on my bed, headphones, and watching tutorials and reading documentation while everyone else slept. Code made sense in a way people never had. Effort led to results. Logic mattered, no favoritism, no guessing what mood someone would be in tomorrow. I never talked about it, not because I was hiding, but because I didn't feel safe sharing anything that mattered to me. In my family, information was currency, and I had learned to keep mine close. After high school, I stayed home. It made financial sense. At least on the surface, I paid my share covered. My own expenses helped when asked, stayed invisible. They assumed I was drifting, barely keeping up, wasting my potential. I let them believe it. Meanwhile, I was building something quietly. I moved into tech full-time, long hours remote work projects that paid better than my family ever imagined. I partnered with someone I trusted. We built, scaled, reinvested. I didn't upgrade my lifestyle. No flashy car, no designer clothes. I liked being underestimated. It kept things simple. The only person who ever really saw me was my grandfather. He lived a few towns over in a small house that smelled like old books and coffee. He asked real questions. He listened to the answers. When I talked about my work, he didn't look confused or bored. He looked proud. He never treated my quiet as weakness. He told me once, "The people who talk the least are usually watching the most." When things felt unbearable at home, I drove to see him. We sat in silence sometimes, and that silence felt kinder than the noise of my own house. He was the only one who ever told me. I didn't know my family access to me just because we shared blood. Looking back, the signs were always there. My mother handled all the finances, but nothing was ever transparent. My name appeared on documents I wasn't asked about. Bills I didn't question, decisions I was excluded from at the time. I told myself it was simpler that way. I didn't want conflict. I didn't want attention. What I didn't realize was that they weren't just overlooking me. They were using me. Quiet people make convenient tools. They don't argue. They don't demand explanations. They don't disrupt plans. And somewhere along the way, my family stopped seeing me as a person and started seeing me as something functional present when useful, disposable when not. I didn't understand that yet. Not fully. I still believed if I stayed reasonable, if I stayed calm, if I stayed loyal, things would eventually balance out. I didn't know they'd already decided my place in the family, and I definitely didn't know how close I was to finding out the truth. The pressure didn't arrive all at once. It crept in quietly, disguised as responsibility, as family duty, as things that supposedly made me more mature than my sisters. Looking back, I can see how carefully it was done. It started with small expectations. Cover this bill, handle that errand, pick up the slack when someone else was too stressed. My mother framed it as trust. You're the reliable one, she'd say like it was a compliment. What it really meant was that I was the easiest to lean on without resistance. When my older sister needed help, it was an emergency. When my younger sister wanted something, it was essential for her happiness. When I needed space or time, it was inconvenient. I paid utilities without being asked, fixed things around the house, took care of paperwork. I wasn't included in decisions about every time I tried to ask questions. My mother brushed them aside. Don't worry about it. I've got it handled, and my father nodded along. Grateful, someone else was taking responsibility so he didn't have to. As my career grew, the demands grew with it. My mother began asking more pointed questions about my work, not curious questions, strategic ones. How stable was my job? Did I work with clients? Could I freelance if needed? She never asked how I felt, only what I could provide. I kept my answers vague. That seemed to irritate her. She liked control, and control required information. When she couldn't get it directly, she applied pressure instead. Passive comments at dinner. Comparisons to my sisters, jokes about how quiet people don't really go anywhere. The message was clear. Prove your worth or accept your place. Financially, the house became heavier. More repairs, more unexpected expenses. I noticed I was paying far more than my share. But whenever I brought it up, my mother reframed it. You live here too. You earn more than you used to. Families don't nickel and dime each other. That line always ended the conversation. At work, things were accelerating. Projects turned into contracts. Contracts turned into real money. I still lived modestly, but the gap between how my family saw me and who I was becoming widened every day. The more capable I became, the more invisible I felt at home. Then something shifted. One night, I came home late and found my mother at the kitchen table, papers spread out in front of her. She closed the folder the second she saw me, just organizing things, she said casually. I caught a glimpse of my name on one of the pages. It wasn't the first time I'd seen it on documents. I didn't remember signing, but this time it stuck with me. I asked what it was. Nothing you need to worry about, she replied. It's family stuff. That should have been the moment I pushed back. It should have been the moment I demanded clarity. Instead, I did what I'd always done. I nodded. I went upstairs. I told myself it wasn't worth the fight. That silence cost me more than I realized. The moral line was crossed a few weeks later. I overheard my mother on the phone speaking in that low, precise tone she used when she thought she was being clever. She mentioned the house, the market timing. She talked about moving on and simplifying. She never mentioned me, not once. I stood halfway up the stairs, listening, as the truth slowly took shape. They were planning something significant, something final, and they had no intention of including me in the conversation. That was when I stopped seeing the situation as accidental. This wasn't neglect. It wasn't thoughtlessness. It was strategy. They were tightening the strings around me financially, emotionally, legally, while keeping me just comfortable enough not to rebel. I was useful until I wasn't. And once I stopped serving a purpose, they were preparing to cut me loose. I didn't confront them. Not because I was afraid, but because I was thinking. I started paying closer attention. I reviewed documents quietly. I checked records I should have looked at years earlier. I noticed patterns that made my stomach drop. My involvement wasn't incidental. It was embedded. And for the first time in my life, I understood something clearly. Staying silent didn't make me safe. It made me convenient. Still, I didn't act. Not yet. I smiled at dinner. I kept my routine. I let them believe I was the same. Quiet, compliant son. They'd always known. Inside, though, something had changed. I wasn't blind anymore. I was waiting, because once you see the truth, you don't rush, you prepare. And I knew whatever was coming next would decide whether I stayed the person they could control or became the person they never saw coming. The breaking point didn't come in the form of a screaming match or a dramatic betrayal. It came quietly the way my family always did their damage. Calm, deliberate, and impossible to walk back. Dinner that night felt off from the moment I sat down. My mother moved through the kitchen with a tight efficiency, the kind she had when decisions were already made. My sisters were unusually cheerful, exchanging glances that didn't include me. My father barely spoke. He never did when he knew what was coming. Halfway through the meal, my mother set her fork down. "I need everyone's attention," she said. Then she looked directly at me. The room seemed to shrink. I knew before she spoke again that whatever she was about to say had already been discussed without me. I was the last to know, as usual. She told us the house had been sold, the paperwork was complete, they were moving out of state tomorrow. For a second, my mind stalled. Tomorrow didn't feel real. Tomorrow was something you prepared for, something you talked about. This wasn't preparation, this was a razor. I asked where they were going. "That's not important," she replied without missing a beat. What mattered, she explained, was that I had 30 days to find somewhere else to live. They weren't taking me with them. I looked at my father, searching for something, an explanation, a protest, a sign that this wasn't intentional. He stared at his plate, jaw clenched. Saying nothing, my older sister smirked. My younger sister laughed under her breath. "You're serious?" I asked. My mother nodded. "You're an adult. It's time you stood on your own." The words hit harder than shouting ever could. This wasn't framed as cruelty. It was framed as reason, as responsibility. As if pushing me out without warning was some kind of life lesson. That was when it happened. Something inside me finally broke. Not into panic or tears, but into clarity. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't stress or poor planning. This was intentional. They had planned this. They had decided my future without me. They had removed me from the family equation as cleanly as closing a door. I waited for anger. It didn't come. What came instead was resolve. I realized in that moment that nothing I did, no obedience, no sacrifice, no silence, would ever make me matter to them. The version of me they valued only existed when I was useful. The second I wasn't, I was expendable. So I stopped arguing. I didn't beg, I didn't plead, I didn't raise my voice. I nodded, pushed my chair back, and stood up. "I understand," I said calmly. My mother looked surprised. She had expected resistance, tears, gratitude, maybe anything but acceptance. I went upstairs and closed my bedroom door and leaned against it. Listening to their voices float up the stairs, light relieved, already moving on. That was the moment I made my decision not to fight them, not to expose them, but to change everything quietly. They thought they had ended my place in that house. What they didn't know was that by trying to remove me, they had crossed a line they couldn't uncross, and the next move wouldn't be theirs. It would be mine. The first thing I did after they left wasn't panic. It was paperwork. The house felt too quiet that morning. Empty rooms, bare walls, the sound of my own footsteps echoing back at me. But instead of packing, I opened my laptop and pulled up files I hadn't touched in years. Accounts, contracts, old emails, things I'd signed without thinking twice, because family wouldn't hurt me. Right. That illusion died quickly. Buried beneath years of routine payments and shared responsibilities was a simple, undeniable truth. Far more than they realized was tied to me, not emotionally. Legally, utilities in my name, insurance policies I paid, renovations I'd funded, and then the big one, the detail that made my hands go still on the keyboard. The house, not all of it, was as cleanly theirs as they believed. Months earlier, when I'd stumbled across the online listing late one night, something in me had gone cold. They were selling the house while I was still living there. No warning, no conversation. I hadn't confronted them. I'd made calls instead. Quiet ones. Turns out when you're the one paying, when your name appears in the right places. When you act before emotions cloud judgment. Leverage builds itself, while they packed boxes and planned their fresh start. I secured my position legally, methodically, without drama. I didn't sabotage anything. I didn't threaten anyone. I simply stopped assuming they had my best interests in mind and started protecting my own. Once they were gone, I followed through. I canceled what I needed to cancel. Sent short, professional emails, polite, cold, irreversible, effective immediately. Per our agreement, this arrangement will no longer continue. No explanations, no justifications. Boundaries don't require speeches. Every message felt like reclaiming a piece of myself I'd given away too easily. Not revenge clarity, not anger control. The last call I made was to my grandfather. He answered on the second ring. They left. I said he didn't ask who. Didn't ask. He didn't ask why. He just said, Are you safe? That question alone nearly broke me. I drove to see him that afternoon. We sat at his kitchen table, the same one where I'd learned years earlier that quiet didn't mean weak. I told him everything. The sale, the dinner, the month I'd been given like an eviction notice disguised as parenting. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he nodded once. I wondered how long it would take. He said, "For what I asked for them to mistake your silence for ownership." He supported me without conditions. No guilt, no pressure to reconcile, just steady reassurance that I wasn't cruel for choosing myself. People like your mother, he said gently, don't hear boundaries until they hit consequences. Back at the house, the transformation was slow but deliberate. I didn't redecorate to prove a point. I did it to breathe. Furniture replaced emptiness. Light returned to rooms that had felt hollow for years. The space stopped feeling borrowed. So did I. Internally, the shift was even sharper. I wasn't waiting anymore. Not for approval, not for permission, not for someone to finally notice me. For the first time, my life wasn't shaped around avoiding conflict. It was shaped around intention. They thought they'd removed me from their future. What they didn't realize was that by walking away, they'd given me the quiet I needed to step fully into my own power. And they still had no idea what they'd lost. They didn't call before showing up. I knew it was coming the moment my phone started lighting up again. Missed calls, unread messages, escalating in urgency. At first confusion, then irritation, then something closer to panic. I ignored all of it. Silence had always been their weapon. Now it was mine. The confrontation happened on a Saturday morning at a downtown hotel cafe. Neutral ground, public, bright, impossible to turn into a scene without witnesses. I chose the place carefully. Power shifts don't happen in private kitchens where memories can be twisted. They happen where facts matter. They were already there when I arrived. My mother sat rigidly at the table, hands folded, jaw tight. My father stared out the window. My sisters flanked her, one tense, the other visibly angry. They looked like people waiting to reclaim something they believed had been taken from them. I sat down calmly. "You're late." My mother said no, I replied. "I'm on time." That irritated her more than if I'd snapped back. She opened her mouth to speak again, but I raised a hand, not aggressively. "Just enough. This isn't a discussion," I said. "It's an explanation." Her eyes narrowed. "You don't get to." "I do," I said evenly. "Because you came here." That was when my attorney arrived. Daniel was unassuming. Mid-40s, calm voice, neutral expression. He didn't look like someone who enjoyed confrontation, which made him perfect. He greeted me first, then nodded politely to my family as if they were strangers, which in many ways they were. My mother stiffened the moment she realized what was happening. "What is this?" she demanded. Daniel set a slim folder on the table and opened it. "I'm here to clarify ownership, financial responsibility, and recent misunderstandings regarding the property on Oak Ridge Drive." The color drained from her face. "You don't need a lawyer," she snapped. "This is a family matter." Daniel smiled politely. "Family matters are often the ones that require the most documentation." He slid the papers across the table. Deeds, payment records, signed agreements, timelines. The silence that followed was heavy. My father leaned forward, squinting. "What is this evidence?" Daniel said simply that Ethan is the primary financial contributor to the property in question, utilities, renovations, insurance, long-term payments, and he turned a page that he exercised his legal right of first refusal when the property was listed. My older sister laughed nervously. "That's impossible." "It's not," Daniel replied. "It's finalized." My mother stood up so fast her chair scraped loudly against the floor, heads turned at nearby tables. "You let us sell our house to you," she hissed. I met her eyes. "You sold it without telling me." "I bought it without telling you." Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. "That's deceitful." "No," I said. "That's legal." My father rubbed his face with both hands. "Why wouldn't you tell us?" I answered honestly. "Because you didn't ask. You didn't include me in any decisions. You didn't warn me. You didn't think I mattered." My younger sister jumped in. "If you had money, you should have helped us. We're struggling now." "The new place. You didn't struggle when you laughed at me." I said, my voice calm but firm. "You didn't struggle when you gave me 30 days to disappear." My mother's tone shifted, softening, recalibrating. "Ethan, listen. Things got out of hand. We didn't realize. You didn't realize what I asked, that I was capable, that I was paying attention, or that actions have consequences." She reached for my hand. I pulled it back. Daniel cleared his throat. To be clear, my client is not obligated to provide financial support. Any future contact regarding the property or finances should go through me. My mother looked at him like he was an intruder. We're his parents. Daniel nodded, and he's an adult. That landed harder than any insult. The cafe felt smaller now. My family started turning on each other. Quiet accusations, whispered blame. My older sister glared at my mother. My younger sister stared at the floor. My father looked tired, older than I'd ever seen him. I stood up. "This is where it ends," I said. My mother looked up sharply. "You can't just cut us off. I'm not cutting you off, you." I said, "I'm stepping away. That's the same thing." "No," I replied. "Cutting someone off is punishment. This is a boundary." I looked at each of them. "I spent my whole life trying to earn a place you never intended to give me. I'm done shrinking to fit your comfort." My father finally met my eyes. "We're still family." I nodded. "You're people I'm related to. That's not the same thing." I turned to leave. "This isn't over," my mother said behind me. I paused at the door, just long enough to look back. "For you, maybe." I said, "For me it is." I walked out into the sunlight, my shoulders lighter than they'd ever been. For the first time, I wasn't walking away in shame. I was walking forward with clarity, control, and a life that finally belonged to me. The fallout didn't explode the way movies make it seem. There were no dramatic apologies, no sudden transformations. Consequences rarely arrive with fireworks. They arrive quietly, and they stay. My parents struggled not catastrophically, but uncomfortably. The kind of struggle that forces reflection bills that required planning choices that couldn't be deferred. For the first time, they had to face a life without my quiet support, holding things together behind the scenes. My grandfather was the only constant. I made sure he was protected legally, financially, and emotionally. Nothing would touch him. That was non-negotiable. He never asked for anything. But he deserved everything I could give. When he smiled and told me he slept better knowing I was finally free, I knew I'd made the right choice. As for me, healing didn't happen overnight. It happened in small, steady ways, mornings without dread, evenings without tension. Celebrating my birthday without waiting to be remembered, hosting friends in a house that finally felt like mine. Not because I owned it, but because I belonged in it. Work continued. Life expanded. I stopped explaining myself. I learned something important in the quiet that followed. Walking away wasn't revenge. Revenge still keeps you tethered to the people who hurt you. What I chose was distance. Distance creates perspective. Perspective creates freedom. Family isn't defined by obligation or bloodlines. It's defined by respect. And respect doesn't require you to disappear so others can feel comfortable. The moment I stopped begging for a place at their table was the moment I built my own.